Dude, you're speaking of ignorance.
I'm speaking of ignorance when you can't answer a question that I've asked 5 times. You just said Tim Scott is in. You just said Tim Scott is in Donald Trump's administration. You're wrong.
Your meanings of is that somebody doesn't want is that so-called brown people to how this or that is wrong, because if that was true, we would have been exterminated.
Okay, so hold on a second. I'm confused. This brown people, this or that is wrong. Can you explain what you mean by that? Because I'm confused.
What I mean by that, as an African American, and the past woman on the show that was African American, you wouldn't even be alive today if the Republicans were that ruthless. Who were the ones that lynched African Americans?
They were ruthless.
It was the Democratic Party.
Decades ago, they were ruthless.
What are you talking about? You don't think the Republican? I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about, your past caller saying what you were just explaining about that water fountain comment.
Yeah.
Is that we're not allowed to drink at water fountains when we clearly are, just like everybody else.
Okay, so Brandon, you're obviously not, with all due respect, good at listening. I didn't say that today black people weren't allowed to drink the same water fountains as white people. I did not say that. That is not the case. However, what I did say was, back in the day,
a few calls ago.
Okay, I understand, but you didn't listen to what I said. Years ago, black people weren't allowed to vote. Years ago.
Under the Democrats.
Okay, so, Brandon, do you mean to tell me that you blame slavery on just the Democrats and one side of the aisle, that our founding fathers were all Democrats? What are you talking about? That's not true.
Abraham Lincoln was a Republican who freed from the.
I understand Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. You're not answering my question. Are you claiming?
There's no Democrats against
DEI. Why are the Republicans the problem?
Yeah, that's a good point, Leonard. Let's talk about 2024, which I think is a lot more important than anything we can talk about the past. Who are the ones who are against DEI? Are those Republicans or Democrats?
Is that Republican?
No.
And who's against affirmative action?
Yeah. Who's against affirmative action? Republicans or Democrats?
You're meaning abortion?
I said affirmative action.
Like in a college where they have to have a certain level of minorities, like Harvard or Yale or Princeton.
So we've already established DEI. Republicans are against DEI.
Having an education system. And
okay, so who's against affirmative action? Republicans or Democrats?
I would say, in actuality, Democrats were the first start in history.
It's hard to have a conversation with you when 99.9% of Democrats in office today believe in affirmative action, and the overwhelming majority of Republicans are against affirmative action. So with all due respect, sir, you're wrong. If you're going to talk about the past and history, you have to talk about what's going on in this country
Democrats
today.
Need to control everything over us.
Why can't you just admit that it's a Republican policy? Just you're Republican. Say, yes, it is a Republican policy, whether you agree with it or not. But you can't say it's a Democratic policy. It's not.
So everything Democrats have done, if they have control over it, and rightly so, there's no problem on that front. Why has it turned out to, still to this day, 80 or 50 years later, hasn't turned right for people of color? Why the false hypocritical thing?
It hasn't turned right for people of color. That is a very generic statement, number one. And number two, the overwhelming majority of MAGA Republicans do not even, the overwhelming majority of Republicans do not even, the overwhelming, are you going to keep interrupting me? The overwhelming majority of Republicans do not even believe systemic racism exists. How many black people are going to be in Donald Trump's administration? Can you name them? Do you know how many black people that are going to be in Trump's administration?
They want to cut the funding for black small businesses. That's one of their policies.
I agree.
That's Republican.
Yeah, but he doesn't know that.
He can admit that and maybe not agree with it.
He won't admit it because he doesn't even know what he's talking about. How many people are in Donald Trump's administration that are black?
Oh, I'll tell you who is for the minister. Tim Scott.
No, Tim Scott is wrong. Wrong. Tim Scott is not in Donald Trump's administration. You doofus and ill-informed, uneducated voter. I will ask you again. What black people are in Donald Trump's incoming administration? Tim Scott is not.
People listen to them like you.
I'm asking you to answer the question. How many people are in Donald Trump's administration that are black? It ain't Tim Scott. Wrong. Let's try number 2, where we can win more stupid prizes.
Donaldson?
Dude, you're speaking of ignorance.
I'm speaking of ignorance when you can't answer a question that I've asked 5 times. You just said Tim Scott is in. You just said Tim Scott is in Donald Trump's administration. You're wrong. Can you name me somebody that's in Donald Trump's administration?
You're making yourself a loser, like you're calling.
Okay, there you go again. See, he calls me a loser. Can't answer the question.
He doesn't know what else to say.
Yeah.
He doesn't have anything.
You vote against your own self-interest. You are another uneducated and ill-informed voter, and quite frankly, you're an embarrassment. Tim Scott is not in Donald Trump's administration. But you know what? He'd probably hire somebody like you. Give him a call. Holy smokes.
You know, in order to speak to someone like that, Brian, in my opinion, he would have to have an equivalent. He'd have to understand DEI. He'd have to understand affirmative action. He'd have to understand Jim Crow. And he's just, like, again, just spouting out.
It's, again,
talking points.
And thought that Tim Scott was in Donald Trump's administration.